All right, in this video, I want to talk about this document here. As we see, it's a General Assembly document. It relates to the Fourth Committee, 78th session, which is the current session, and it's an L3, a limited distribution document. It was published October 3rd, 2023, and it relates to agenda item 58, and that agenda item is the implementation of the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples. This is a draft decision submitted by the chair of the Fourth Committee, and the title of the document is Question of Gibraltar. All right, so what's going on in this document? As we said earlier, it's a draft decision, and so the Fourth Committee here is basically drafting this document here, and they're calling it a draft decision. They're submitting this up to the General Assembly for their approval, and as we'll see later, the Fourth Committee does discuss and vote on this. But inside the document itself, the draft decision, where we typically see resolutions, but once in a while there'll be draft decisions. So the difference between the two is the resolution we usually see with preambulatory paragraphs, and then at the bottom the operative paragraphs. With draft decisions, they skip the preambulatory and they just go right into the operative, which is what they do here. So the draft decision is recalling its decision of last session. And basically that decision from last year is the same exact word for word of this one. And here they urge the governments of Spain and the UK and to have them listen to the interests and aspirations of Gibraltar that are legitimate under international law, to reach, in the spirit of Brussels, a definitive solution to the question of Gibraltar. Takes note of the desire of the UK to continue with the trilateral forum for dialogue. Takes note of the position of Spain that the trilateral form of dialogue does not exist and should be replaced with a new mechanism, and welcomes the efforts by all to resolve problems in advance in a spirit of trust and solidarity to find common solutions. All right, so first thing I like to do is I like to check out the 78th session agenda. This is agenda item 58. So here is our agenda of the 78th session, A78-251. And in in category B, maintenance of international peace and security is item 58, which is right here, implementation of the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples. All right, what is the Fourth Committee? So the Fourth Committee is one of the main committees. The main committees are First Committee, Second Committee, Third Committee, Fourth Committee, Fifth Committee, Sixth Committee. And there are subsidiary organs of the General Assembly. And we go look at their website, and it's named the Special Political and Decolonization Committee. And it considers a broad range of issues covering a cluster of 5 decolonization-related agenda items, the effects of atomic radiation, questions relating to information, a comprehensive review of the question of peacekeeping operations, as well as a review of special political missions, the UN Relief Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, Israeli practices and settlement activities affecting the rights of Palestinians and other Arabs, and international cooperation in the peaceful uses of outer space. So that's quite a broad range, but the topics that we're interested in here, which relates to our document, is right here, the decolonization related agenda items. And so this cluster of 5 decolonization-related agenda items are actually these agenda items right here. If we go back to the agenda for the 78th, here we see number 53, questions relating to information. But after that, starting with 54, we've got information from non-self-governing territories. 55, also talking about non-self-governing territories. 56, here's the implementation of the declaration, which is our agenda item. 57, also discusses non-self-governing territories, and 58 is our agenda item. 56 is another one, but also deals with implementation of the Declaration on the Granting. So these five, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples. Let's see what that is all about. Here is the Declaration itself. It is a General Assembly Resolution 1514, and it was done in the 15th session, so about 1960. And I just highlighted a few paragraphs. Here's a few, the preambular paragraphs. This is quite an amazing document. It's basically saying that those colonial countries that were existing, after World War II, we desire that they should gain their independence. The people should be independent. And here's some of the paragraphs. Recognizing that the peoples of the world ardently desire the end of colonialism in all its manifestations, convinced that the continued existence of colonialism prevents the development of international economic cooperation, impedes the social, cultural, economic development of dependent peoples, and militates against the United Nations ideal of universal peace, affirming that people may, for their own ends, freely dispose of their natural wealth and resources without prejudice to any obligations arising out of international economic cooperation based upon the principle of mutual benefit, international law, believing that the process of liberation is irresistible and irreversible, and that, in order to avoid serious crisis, an end must be put to colonialism and all practices of segregation and discrimination associated therewith. And then the United Nations declares that the subjection of peoples to alien subjugation, domination, exploitation constitutes a denial of fundamental human rights contrary to the Charter of the United Nations and is an impediment to the promotion of world peace and cooperation. All peoples have the right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. So what does this have to do with Gibraltar? Well, Gibraltar is actually is described by the United Kingdom as a crown colony. It was once described as a crown colony, and it's actually part of the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, as we'll see soon, has administration powers over it. Okay, so this declaration here was in the 15th session. So the General Assembly has this resolution that's been approved and adopted, and now they need to get work on it. The United Nations then starts to identify all of the countries and territories that now need to have their independence. So it looks like a few sessions later, in the 18th session, there is this annex to a report. The agenda item here is regarding the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples. And they actually identify all the outstanding territories. And it's on page 288 here. And so there's 4 categories that all of the countries and territories are put in. The first one are trust territories, and there's 3 of them: New Guinea, Nauru, and the trust territory of the Pacific Islands. There's actually, I think later, there's about 4 or 5 different countries that came out of this from the U.S. The second category, the territory of Southwest Africa, and it's actually just one area. At that time, it was called Southwest Africa, but now it's the free and independent country of Namibia. The third category, territories which have been declared by the General Assembly to be non-self-governing territories within the meaning of Chapter 11 of the Charter, but on which information is not transmitted by the administering powers concerned. Chapter 11 of the Charter talks about how countries that are administering territories, they have to provide information. But this is a category of countries, territories, where the administering power is not transmitting information. And 5, 6, 7, 8 countries or so. I think some of these may still be outstanding, still be territories. I haven't looked into all those. And then the last one, non-self-governing territories on which information is transmitted by the administering powers. And here we see all of these, or most of them now. I don't know the status of all of them, but we do have the subject that we're talking about. Here's Gibraltar. All right, so let's look into more about this non-self-governing territory. And if we go to actually the United Nations website here, they have a page on non-self-governing territories. And here they actually list all of the ones that are now outstanding. So we see here Western Sahara, that's the only one in Africa. And then they list also the administering power. So these are territories, quasi-countries that have some sort of government, but there's always an administering power, so a larger country that's just kind of involved in day-to-day government affairs. And so here's Western Sahara in Africa, and actually the administering power here was Spain, but Spain withdrew their right as administering power. And then here's another group in the Atlantic and Caribbean, and they're all United Kingdom, and then there's one U.S. And in Europe, there's one left, Gibraltar, which we're going to talk about in a second. And then you've got Pacific, which is broken up: U.S., France, United Kingdom, and New Zealand. And so these are the remaining 17 non-self-governing territories. The United Nations is helping to break those chains of colonialism and let these places govern themselves. And it all started here with in Chapter 11 of the Charter. The non-self-governing territories are defined as territories whose people have not yet attained a full measure of self-government. The General Assembly, by its resolution 66-1, so in the very first session, and actually I have that one here in right here. So this is actually the very first session of the General Assembly. There's 66th resolution. This is right here, and it says the General Assembly notes that information has been transmitted by the governments of. These are the administering powers. For France concerning, so here are all the French ones. And then the United Kingdom concerning conditions in. Here are all those, and you'll see Gibraltar is there. And then there's a few others. Here's Belgium. I think they're done now. So let me take a step back and talk about these NSGTs. We see here in this resolution, it talks about Article 73E of the Charter. So let's take a look at that. And here is Article 73, and it's declaration regarding the NSGTs, non-self-governing territories. Members of the UN which have or assume responsibilities for the administration of territories whose people have not yet attained a full measure of self-government. And then subparagraph E, they have to transmit regularly to the Secretary General for information purposes, subject to such limitations as security, constitutional considerations may require, statistical and other information of a technical nature relating to economic, social, educational conditions in the territories for which they are respectively responsible, other than those territories to which chapters 12 and 13 apply. So here is something in the Charter that talks about the requirement for producing information. So I think it's maybe on an annual basis, these administering powers, for example, the United Kingdom, they will give a report to the UN on the conditions in all of their NSGTs, and of course, and they do that as well for Gibraltar. Here's a quick little minute video that I found. Well, actually, this one's 6 minutes. I clipped a small part of this video here that gives you an idea of the existing state of non-self-governing territories.
Member States and the Special Committee on Decolonization.
When the UN was formed at the end of World War II, 72 non-self-governing territories and 11 trust territories were identified as under the control of administering authorities. In 1994, Palau, the last remaining trust territory, gained independence, but as of 2020, 17 NSGTs yet remain. Today, the majority are islands in the Caribbean and Pacific. The United Nations remains steadfast in its efforts to end colonialism around the world.
All right, let's talk a little bit about Gibraltar. I've heard of it. I didn't know exactly where it was on Earth. I've heard of Rock of Gibraltar, but I had to look it up myself. Let's go to Google Earth. take a look where it is. So here it is, right? Looks like the mouth of the Mediterranean, this narrow channel that goes through from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean, and it looks like it's Spain. If you wouldn't know it, you would think, oh, this Gibraltar must be part of Spain. And look how close, and then look how close it is to Africa. So that's interesting. Let's go down and take a look. And Gibraltar here is here. This red line here separates it from Europe and Spain. And this is it. This is Gibraltar, the entire country. They're seeking independence. Let's take a look. I think we can go in, look at a little 3D view. This is pretty much the entire country here. Looks like you've got some little bit of urban area here. Here's the airport. Here's the border. There's the rock. You got some beachside condos, some residences here. Road that goes through the mountain. Sports field. Another sports field. There we come around. Looks like some kind of port. Maybe a couple ports, and then the airport. There, that's the entire country. All right, let's go to the CIA World Factbook just to get an idea of the population and area. Let's see, the area here says that it's a total of 7 square kilometers, and that gives it a ranking of 245. And it's more than 10 times the size of the National Mall in DC. And then for population, 29,000, less than 30,000 people as of 2023. I mean, that's the size of a small town in any place in the world. So, and then we look at ethnic groups, 79% identify as Gibraltarians, British 13%, and Spanish 2%. And we'll see how that's relevant. All right, I want to take a quick look at the history of Gibraltar and how it came to be at this point. So we have got to go pretty far back. Here's a UK Parliament website, and they have a quick discussion on the history. Gibraltar was first settled by Moors in 1292, fought over between Moor and Spanish rulers before taken by Spain in 1492. So here we have an admission by the UK that, yes, Gibraltar was part of Spain in 1492. However, later on, it was in 1704, Gibraltar was captured by the British in the name of the Habsburg claimant to the Spanish throne. All non-English troops were expelled from the Rock in 1711. Gibraltar passed under British sovereignty under Article 10 of the Treaty of Utrecht of 1713, which brought an end to the War of Spanish Succession. And because I am a nerd, I looked up the Treaty of Utrecht, and here it is right here. This is the Catholic king does hereby for himself, his heirs and successors, yield to the crown of Great Britain the full entire propriety of the town and castle of Gibraltar, together with the port, fortifications, forts thereunto belonging, and he gives up the said propriety to be held and enjoyed absolutely with all manner of right forever, without any exception or impediment whatsoever. So that sounds pretty clear to me. But here further on, we'll see that the British government regard British title as based on continuous possession over a long period. It has been occupied since 1804. The present boundary fence erected in 1908. Spain does not accept British title to this land. Also denies that the Treaty of Utrecht conveys any right to territorial waters for Gibraltar. So here we're starting to get the first taste of what is actually going on with the independence of Gibraltar. And indeed, Spain, I believe, has been putting up impediments, roadblocks for this to happen, although I believe those are slowly being lifted, as we'll see in a minute. And now I just want to touch upon a little bit of the history of the United Nations efforts to get Gibraltar to become independent. And so as we saw back in 1946, the very first session, Gibraltar was listed as one of the territories that was subject to an administrating power. And now we'll take a look here at this document here is from the 11th session. So 11 years after that, the fourth committee was meeting and they're discussing not only Gibraltar, but the other non-self-governing territories. And I found here Spain spoke up and observed that the UK called Gibraltar a non-self-governing territory, submitted information with regard to it, which they're supposed to do, and he reserved his government's position, Spain's position. In that respect, he reaffirmed the inalienable rights of Spain over Gibraltar, and expressed the hope that that matter, as well as other matters which have been raised, especially affecting Spain's sister republics, will be solved in the spirit of understanding so as to promote maintenance of international peace and security. So here we are, even over 250 years after after Spain signed the treaty giving up Gibraltar, they're saying nope, it wasn't done properly. And later in other documents, they kind of detail exactly why that is. And then the UK also spoke, and they said that the UK has no doubt concerning its sovereignty over the territory of Gibraltar, formally reserved its rights on the question. So here we go. This is just the beginning of the conflict between the UK and Spain regarding Gibraltar. And here's a working paper from the Secretary General on Gibraltar, which gives some more information and details about the history and the situation, what's going on. And here's they put forth the position of Spain, and they say that at the third meeting of the fourth committee on October 4th, 2022, Spain said that Gibraltar had been militarily occupied by the UK in 1704, and that Spain had been forced to cede to the UK only the town and castle of Gibraltar, together with its port, without ceding territorial jurisdiction. So Spain still maintains the ground under which the fort and other structures and infrastructure that may have been built, and that, let's see, so it also says that Spain says that the United Nations in this resolution from the 22nd session, 2353, it had established that the decolonization process should be governed by the principle of territorial integrity. So Spain saying that, regardless that the UK was occupying the area, still, according to UN policy, the Spain maintains that territory. It's still theirs. And going back to our document, the document here lists something called the Brussels Declaration in 1984, and there's also this trilateral forum for dialogue, which Spain says it does not exist any longer. And if we go, here's an article about this right here, and the Brussels process, which began in 1984, it was just a way to start the negotiations. And in it, they created this tripartite forum. And here we go. And then the function of the forum agreement was very different for the three participants. For the British, it offered a means of removing the issue of the future sovereignty of Gibraltar from the forefront of relations with Spain. So UK wanted to make it very clear to Spain that it is not their sovereignty, who's the administering powers. This is not an issue. It is UK, and Spain has no rights whatsoever. UK also wanted to improve relations with Gibraltar after the damage of the joint sovereignty proposals. There was some discussion about the UK and Spain discussing the sovereignty of it, but they did not include Gibraltar, and they were Gibraltarians were very upset about that. So UK wanted to improve those relations. For Gibraltar, it provided the opportunity to enhance cross-border cooperation, economic activity, remove the obstructionism created by Spain's obsession with the issue of sovereignty, while ensuring nothing could be agreed between Britain and Spain without Gibraltar's agreement. At some point in the history, Spain tried to retake Gibraltar, not through military force, but just by making it very difficult to cross the border into Spain. I think, in fact, it was closed at one point. Ships within that area, within the territorial waters, though they were harassed a lot, and I think telecommunications also was cut off. But that was then lifted. But that was the obstructionism created by Spain. And then for Spain, it represented the creation of an opportunity for the much needed development of the region of the Campo. That's the area just above the border. And more importantly, start the wooing process that it was hoped would lead at some unspecified time in the future to Gibraltarians finding no reason to object to a transfer of sovereignty to Spain. So again, Spain still has their hopes up. And that was the tripartite forum for dialogue. But I believe that just petered out after 10 years or so. And one more document I want to talk about is this from the web. It's an article by Dr. Joseph Garcia, Political History of Gibraltar. He gives a nice history, and the link is in the description. He gives a nice history of the situation of Gibraltar, and just a few sentences here. He mentions that in 1969, Spain had completely closed the border. And then 2 years before that, referendum was held. The people of Gibraltar were asked whether they want to remain British or be handed over to Spain. 12,000 people voted for Britain. 44 chose Spain. So that's quite lopsided, and you could see that the people of Gibraltar probably prefer remaining their allegiance with the UK. And then after the border was closed in 1969, it was until the border was opened only for pedestrians in 1982. So 13 years, no vehicles could cross. They're saying Gibraltar was a city under siege. Franco had cut off the territory by land and by sea. Telephone communications were removed. Air restrictions imposed. And then the only lines of communication kept open were travel by air to London, sea to Morocco. So that's the background on the question of Gibraltar. Give you some background on the history, the countries of UK, Spain, the conflict between them, and Gibraltarians in the middle. And so now I want to go back to the document, and we're going to watch and listen to the meeting, the fourth committee meeting, when this question of Gibraltar draft decision was presented by the chairperson of the committee. And actually we get a special treat because the person who wrote that article, Dr. Joseph Garcia, he actually is now the newly elected Deputy Chief Minister of Gibraltar, and he was invited by the fourth committee to speak, and let's listen to him now.
You have the floor, sir.
Chair. I appear before you today as the newly re-elected Deputy Chief Minister of the Government of Gibraltar. So I speak for the government and the people of my country. Exactly 60 years ago, the elected representatives of Gibraltar appeared before the United Nations for the first time. We argued then for the recognition of our right to self-determination. We called for the exercise of that right, and we asserted our desire for our democratic decolonization. 60 years later, Madam Chair, we're still here saying the same thing. Nothing has happened. There is yet to be meaningful engagement by the United Nations. The UN has simply looked the other way. Not only is this disappointing, it is unacceptable. Gibraltar wants to engage with this committee and with the Committee of 24. We want to achieve a decolonized status. We want to be removed from your list of non-self-governing territories, and the Administering Power has publicly said that it supports us in working towards this goal. Gibraltar recently marked these 60 years of coming to the UN with a public exhibition. It covered the details of our interventions before this committee and before the Committee of 24. Those interventions have always reflected our eagerness and enthusiasm to achieve a decolonized status. Many of you represented here today were colonies once. You will know why this is important. You have experienced at first hand the struggles of decolonization. For some of you, it was more painful than for others. Large former colonies like India, Australia, Canada, and South Africa are now increasingly important players on the world stage. Small nations like Grenada, St. Lucia, Nauru have achieved decolonization too. Some of you are smaller than Gibraltar, and many of you are a part of the Commonwealth. We too are proud of our links with Commonwealth countries and with its organizations and institutions, and we look to you for support and guidance as we pursue our own journey on the path towards decolonization. All we ask, Madam Chair, is for that same route map that others have used to be applied to us as well. The people of Gibraltar cannot and must not be treated any differently. That is why we would welcome a visiting mission from the Committee of 24. That is why we again request that you engage formally with the government and the people of my country. Madam Chair, the people of Gibraltar have inhabited the famous rock at the entrance to the Mediterranean for over 300 years. Our distinct multicultural society has existed, for example, well before the independence of the United States of America. Our ancestors settled in Gibraltar from other parts of the Mediterranean after 1704. Traders and merchants began to arrive from Genoa more than a century before the unification of Italy. Sephardic Jews came from North Africa. Workers came from Malta in the late 19th century. Others arrived from the United Kingdom, from Spain and elsewhere. A proud Hindu community migrated from India over the last century. In the 1960s and 70s, many more came from Morocco, and they too now call Gibraltar their home. They are all part of who we are as a people with a unique identity of our own. That influx of immigrants has, over 300 years, produced the Gibraltarian of today. We are a separate and distinct people from the administering power, a people with the inalienable rights to self-determination under international law. Madam Chair, you will know that a neighboring state, the Kingdom of Spain, has long asserted a territorial claim to our country. We reject that claim. Spain seeks to redraw a European border to what it was before 1704. This is a frightening notion. It has huge implications that extend far beyond Gibraltar. The truth is that we are no longer in the 18th century. Today, people have rights. Today, people come first. Today, the wishes of the people must be paramount. Madam Chair, while we reject Spain's territorial claim to our country, we also extend the hand of friendship to our neighbor. Gibraltar's exit from the European Union has caused us to work together to solve shared challenges. We want to protect and enhance the economy of Gibraltar and of the region around it. Gibraltar exerts a positive economic impact on the neighboring area of Spain. There are 15,000 people who live in Spain and work in Gibraltar. Most are citizens of the European Union. Some 9,000 are Spanish nationals. That makes Gibraltar the second largest employer for the southern region of Spain. We purchase some $1.5 billion worth of goods and materials annually from Spanish companies. Gibraltarians spend over $100 million a year on goods and services from Spain. There is a need to protect that economic interaction going forward. That is why, together with the United Kingdom, Gibraltar has been working on a treaty to safeguard our relationship with the European Union and with Spain. We are fully committed and continued that work after a new Spanish government has been formed following their own electoral process. But make no mistake, we will never surrender any part of our sovereignty. Gibraltar belongs to the people of Gibraltar. Nonetheless, Madam Chair, there is still hope. There is always hope that future generations may come to see Gibraltar differently, through the prism of democracy and human rights, rather than as a mere object of Spain's territorial ambition. Because we live in a world where people cannot simply be handed over between kings and princes against their wishes. This means that the freely and democratically expressed wishes of the people of Gibraltar must prevail. We cannot simply be transferred from an existing colonial power to a new one. That is not decolonization. That is recolonization. Worse still is the notion of replacing one colonial power with the two of them jointly. We have overwhelmingly rejected that already. So, Madam Chair, this is the fourth international decade for the eradication of colonialism. The UN cannot be all words and no action. I urge you and your committee to map out a path for the decolonization of Gibraltar. I call on the United Nations to move on their mandate, and I assert that the people of Gibraltar must be the only ones to determine their own future. In this day and age, there can be no other way. Thank you for your attention.
All right, before final thoughts, just want to show you the General Assembly meeting where the draft decision was ultimately approved by the Fourth Committee, and then it went up to the General Assembly for their review and approval. So I just want to show you that, and just so you know also that they've been doing this every year. Like the 77th session, they had the same draft decision. I didn't check prior to that, but I assume that every year this has happened. It's the identical verbatim draft decision from the Fourth Committee on the question of Gibraltar, and it just keeps getting pushed on to the next year. So here is this.
We shall now take action on the draft decision entitled Question of Gibraltar. The committee adopted the draft decision without a vote. May I take it that the Assembly wishes to do likewise? It is so decided.
So there you have it, another draft decision approved by the General Assembly. And, you know, if you read it closely, there's not anything there which proclaims that Gibraltar is seeking either independence as an independent nation or membership to the United Nations. Here, the United Nations in the draft decision is phrasing it as a definitive solution to the question of Gibraltar. Gibraltar, I think you could see from Dr. Garcia's speech, they want to become independent. What the next step after that is, I'm not sure, but I would think that they're trying to eventually become members of the United Nations, although that may not be the case. Switzerland was independent for some time, but then only joined the United Nations, I think, in 2002. So I don't really know what the expectations are, the desires for Gibraltar with regards to membership in the United Nations, but one would think that they do want to become that. But it's not, they've never, in all the research, I have not seen it where they've declared that they want to become a member of the United Nations. So in order to become a member, I just wanted to touch upon that real quick. If we go to the charter, how do you become a member of the United Nations? Well, it is open to all other peace-loving states. So I guess that's the first step for Gibraltar. They need to become a state, and they need to be peace-loving. They need to accept the obligations contained in the present charter and in the judgment of the organization able to and willing to carry out these obligations. And the admission of any such state will be affected by a decision of the General Assembly upon the recommendation of the Security Council. So there's a requirement right there. You need the recommendation of the Security Council. So what they're probably looking for is something like here's the Security Council. This is a note by the Secretary General saying that Tuvalu has applied for admission. So, like, for example, for Gibraltar, I have not seen this document. It may or may not exist, but Secretary General is just notifying the General Assembly and the Security Council the application for Tuvalu for admission to membership. And then after that, they then probably want to have this. Here's the Security Council resolution recommends to the General Assembly that Tuvalu be admitted to membership. And then finally, they might want this at the end. And this is, that's the application. Here's the General Assembly resolution for Tuvalu, admitting Tuvalu to membership in the United Nations. But again, I'm not sure if Gibraltar even wants to go this route, or maybe they haven't even thought about it yet. I sent an email to Dr. Garcia asking for a comment, and I also sent an email to the Secretary General asking, hey, has Gibraltar submitted an application, or is the Security Council does they have a meeting set up to discuss it? But I think there's probably a lot of things to work out right now, especially with UK as the administering country. I believe that all of the international treaties, UK has signed those on behalf of Gibraltar. So all of those international treaties, probably they're maybe discussing those right now. Will Gibraltar be able to accede to those treaties? Maybe, and if they can on some, does the UK retain that responsibility for Gibraltar? So there's probably all these different treaties they're trying to work out right now. And I'm guessing that's part of a lot of the back channel discussions that are not probably open to the public. And there's probably some business interests as well that the UK has or other countries have, and they want to make sure that that's protected. But unfortunately, this has been going on since 1946. After World War II, Gibraltar was declared to be a non-self-governing territory, and the United Nations Charter. One of the purposes is to get to have the peoples have the right to self-determination, but that just hasn't happened for Gibraltar. I hope it does, although it's maybe a little bit unfair if you have every member of the United Nations. I want them to become independent, but then the next step, becoming a member of the United Nations, maybe that. Probably they're not ready for that, or maybe it would be unfair. You have 38,000 people that have one vote, and you have U.S. has 400 million and they have one vote, so they would be equal. But of course, U.S. still would retain permanent membership in the Security Council, and they would have a veto for anything through there. But I guess that's a separate issue. But yes, I hope Gibraltar eventually obtains their independence and everything that is worked out. I'd like to hear what those issues are. What is being worked on right now? What is stopping Gibraltar from becoming recognized by different countries as independent? But that's probably not something that's publicly available, but maybe Dr. Garcia could help me understand what that is. Hopefully he sees my email and responds. All right, that is it for the question of Gibraltar. Thank you.